So today we are going to be introducing ourselves to Graham Phillips, who is going to do a nice talk for you guys. So have questions at the end.
I want to die young at a ripe old age, said Ashley Montague. So, Madame Jean Calment. And she said, I've only ever had one wrinkle and I'm sitting on it. And she rode a bike until the age of 100. And she only quit smoking when she was 117. And that was because her hands were shaking too much. So she gave up. And she's the oldest recorded longest life to have lived. And she lived to the ripe old age of 122. So if anyone in the room wants, to break the barrier, that's what you need to aim for. So just imagine this is a pub quiz, okay? And I'm going to ask you a series of questions, no right or wrong answers. Well, they may turn out to be right or wrong answers, but don't be shy. You can't abstain, okay? So is fasting healthy or unhealthy? Who would say that fasting is unhealthy? And who would say that fasting is healthy? Mainly genetic or mainly lifestyle or just luck? So who would say that longevity is mainly lifestyle? Who says it's mainly genetic? Okay, fair enough. Are men genetically predestined to predecease women? We know that men in general do live shorter lives than women, but is it inevitable? Who would say, yes, it's a genetic thing and it's inevitable? Who would agree with that? Okay. And who would disagree? Okay. We know that in most of the developed world, men have shorter lives than women, right? Is that a genetic inevitability? In other words, they're genetically designed to have shorter lives than women, or actually not? Okay. Okay. Which matters more, diet or exercise? Who says diet? And we're thinking longevity here. Okay, and who says exercise? Okay, so it's about an even split. Okay, does eating fat make you fat? Who would agree with that statement, that fat makes you fat? About half, and who disagrees? Okay. Are all calories equal? Who would say yes, all calories are equal? Longevity. Okay, and who disagrees with that? Can't sit on the fence. Is this what you do in tutorials? They're not equal. Is that the consensus? Okay. Well, what is it that makes us fat? Is it a mixture of gluttony and sloth? In other words, we just need to eat less and move more. Who would agree with that? And who would disagree with that? Okay. Who would agree with the statement that breakfast is the most important thing of the day? And who disagrees with it? Okay. And how much sleep should we get? So I'm going to start the bidding at 6 hours. Anyone says 6 hours? 7 hours? Anyone bids for 7 hours? Okay. 8 hours? 9 hours?
You like 24 hours.
You like 24 hours?
For the weekend.
Yeah. Okay. So I always make the contradistinction between health span and lifespan. Human beings are 82 years old, right? And you can measure lifespan in two ways, right? Or health span or aging. You can say, well, it's the difference between today and the day I was born. Okay. Or you could say is how healthy and vital am I? And if you look at these two people, you would never think they were both the same age. And the beautiful African lady on the left she's quite famous in America. She's quite a famous bodybuilder, but she's not like an Olympic athlete. She only started training in her 60s. It shows that there's nothing inevitable about, the guy on the right, slumped in his chair, obviously demented, hardly can eat some soup, but somebody's probably still pumping some statins into him. And that's where none of us wants to end up, right? It's going to be quite challenging this evening in some of the things that I say. And I'm going to challenge quite a lot of the things you think you know, things that are handed down to all of us, like gravity, right? Now, you'd have to be mad to challenge gravity, or to say, no, the Earth is flat. I don't agree that the Earth is round. You would be dismissed. But if you looked at that from a scientific point of view, you say, okay, Graham, you think the Earth's flat, we think it's round, bring forth your data, and let's see who's got the best data. Okay? I think I'd lose, by the way. I'm not a flat earther, but the scientific endeavor is not about a religious belief in a conviction in something, right? The principle of science is that we argue about stuff, and we keep on arguing about stuff. And, you know, the best scientists are the ones who set up a theory and spend their lives trying to knock it down. And I think that's changed. I think that's changed. So when I talk about cognitive dissonance and my challenge to your intellect, on the chart there is the number of people who died by becoming tangled in their bed sheets relative to per capita cheese consumption, right? And it correlates beautifully, right? Anyone thinks that the two things are actually cause and effect. It's clearly a correlation, but anyone in the room would say, yeah, it's well known that if you eat more cheese, you're going to die by becoming tangled in your bed. It's ridiculous, right? All sorts of things like that get exploited by poor scientists, particularly when I get to food and food frequency questionnaires and things like red meat's going to kill you and give you cancer. Think back to this slide. And it's actually quite an interesting website called Spurious Correlations. There's loads of them, but this is just a personal favorite of mine. People die at 25 and aren't buried until they're 75. Yeah, we all know those people. Nobody in this room, however. Subject to being a little bit provocative, what does that mean to each of you in the room? The absence of illness, or is there more to it? The other question I have is, what role does nutrition play in all of this? Who thinks it's broadly irrelevant, it's all about calories? And who says, no, nutrition is absolutely key? The food industry, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I think it's 12 companies dominate the world supply chain. Look at the number of familiar brands in all of that. And I'm here to argue for your benefit. They're here for shareholder value and to make profit. If the profit motive has an adverse effect on you individually, that's not their problem, because they're not supposed to do that. They're supposed to make profit. Think about the turnover we've got here. We've got turnover bigger than whole countries, right? And how they dominate marketing, how they dominate the science, how they can do exactly what the cigarette industry did way back, which is to buy the scientists and set up committees to show that smoking doesn't cause lung cancer. In 1997, there was a Senate hearing with the chief executives of the 5 biggest tobacco companies, and they swore that in their best understanding of the science, there's no relationship between smoking and lung cancer. Not 1937, not 1957, 1997. You can find it on the internet. And they've known the truth for 40 years. And I'm here to argue that actually these people are now killing more people than the smoking industry. The paradigm that we've ended up with pollutes our metabolism, makes us sick. The industry comes along and makes you 10% better. Now, I'm not saying this is a deliberate conspiracy. I don't think it is. But you can see how one benefits from the other. The food industry requirement to make you healthier. Most people would assume that the pharmaceutical industry is there for good, public good. Actually not. The pharmaceutical industry is here for shareholder value, not your health. The name Pfizer and all these respected names, I'm not saying they're all necessarily evil, but just remember, your health isn't what they're interested in. They're interested in profit and shareholder value. The company in the entire world has had the largest fine for bad behavior. Pfizer, yeah. And it's just the cost of doing business. Pfizer maximum fine, and then AZ maximum fine. And then, of course, currently it's Novo Nordisk doing evil stuff with all the Wegovy, Ozempic. Don't be naive to this. At this stage, I'm just a crazy conspiracy theorist, but I hope to convince you that maybe I am, but a bit more to it than that. Teachers, what does history teach us? Weston Price. And Weston Price is quite an interesting character. He was a Canadian dentist who ended up in America, and he went in search of healthy people. Many healthy people in America. He saw fat, sick people, and this is in the 30s and 40s, right? Compare it with it is now. Traveling around the world for several years at tribes. And he was able, not like we can't really do this today, but he was able to look at an area where the American food chain had taken over in a location. The tribe were fat and sick and had terrible teeth. But because communications were quite weak, miles up the road, and the tribe will be leading a perfectly normal, for them, ancestral existence, ancestral diet. And it's worth having a look. He's got a fantastic foundation. You might want to read his book. He did seminal work that showed that it's the American food, as it's permeated the food chain, is doing tremendous damage. Ancestral diets provided maybe 10 times as many of the fat-soluble vitamins as the modern food. Water-soluble vitamins. Which mineral you pick, maybe 60 times more minerals. And I'll explain the significance of that. On any high street, and we're all getting fatter and sicker and more diabetic by the day, right? As a kid, I was the fat kid. And I was a fat kid in a class of slim kids. I was the odd one out. I just had my 65th birthday. You go back to that class today, the slim kid is the odd one out. Ask yourselves why, what happened? The data so much for the UK, but we're not far behind. So you can see type 2 diabetes, which is incredibly common these days, particularly in certain ethnicities, and I'm sure there are people in the room who are concerned about it. Almost 5,000% increase in type 2 diabetes in a little over 100 years. What changed? In almost the entire developed world, heart disease is the single largest killer. There are a few countries now where, but broadly in the vast majority of the developed world, heart disease is the single largest killer. And yet there's literally no recorded heart attacks in the entire world's medical literature before about 1910. None, zero, zilch. Thinking they just couldn't detect it, right? You're thinking, yeah, it was going on, they couldn't detect it. But they could, because they did autopsies at scale. Tremendous numbers of autopsies were done. They would literally dismantle the bodies. They were very good at knowing what went wrong. The idea that they'd have missed a third of people dying of heart attacks and the other third of people dying of cancer because they were such incompetent doctors makes no sense. It brings me on to human nutrition. And my salient point here is it really isn't about the calories. You can see the slide very well, but these are basically, on the left is the list of really important micronutrients, from vitamin A at the top to omega-3 fatty acids, vitamins and minerals. And at the top, you can see the ones that are the most energy dense. So beef liver. Nobody eats beef liver these days, do they? Right? Oysters, lamb chops, eggs, pork. I know it's a very busy slide. Don't worry too much. It's just the principle, right? It's the calories in grams needed to provide a third of the recommended intakes for adults of iron, zinc, calcium, folate, vitamins A and B12, right? In other words, this is how much of these foods you need to eat to get a third of your micronutrient content. Feature, what a surprise. But you know, refined grain products, healthy whole grains, right at the bottom. Fruits, very close to the bottom. What's at the top? The sort of food that hunter-gatherers would have eaten. Liver, spleen, small dried fish, dark leafy vegetables, kidney, heart, crustaceans, goat beef and eggs. That's where a healthy diet comes from. Almost nobody's eating like that now. We've done a little bit of history. Now I'm going to do a bit more history. I'm going to go back 4 billion years. Don't worry, the lecture won't last 4 billion years. An archaea, which is an ancient unicellular organism, swallowed a bacteria. That was like mutually assured self-destruction, but actually they both cohabited and lived together happily ever after. First eukaryote, that was the beginnings of multicellular organism. That one change, because they think it only happened once, the key to human evolution, multicellular organisms, remarkable. And when the bacteria went to live inside the eukaryote, went to live inside the archaea, they swapped DNA, kind of exchange of genetic material. This is the key to life. It's the key to sickness. It's the key to health. And I'll explain why. You ever heard of mitochondria? Cell. Yep. That's what I was taught when I was your age at uni. That's all I was taught. Turns out it's a lot more complicated. Energy production is key. When you die, ultimately, what actually happens at death is your mitochondria stop producing energy and the cells die at scale. But it turns out, and this is really new science that's literally in the last 5 to 10 years, so I haven't gone through the whole of it. There's a lot more to it. It's all really complicated. I haven't got the time. They're signaling molecules. So they produce reactive oxygen species that you've probably heard of. And too many reactive oxygen species, but a certain number is part of their natural signaling process. Like the membrane potential of the cell, right? So if you think back to your O-level biology, there's a differential, isn't there, between the inside and the outside of the cell? And that's what creates the energy, and that's what you need to maintain homeostasis within the cell. So the cell's always trying to maintain its internal environment and stop things coming in, pumping them in and out. That's what mitochondria are doing. It doesn't stop their apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. So what cells are supposed to do is divide a certain number of times and then die. One of the things that goes wrong in cancer, the cell says, sorry, Mr. Organism, I don't want to die. In fact, it's everyone for themselves, right? And that's kind of, if you think about cancer, it's cells multiplying out of control instead of becoming part of an individual, part of a community of cells where they will collaborate. It's like, no, I'm like a single bacteria. I'm out for myself. I'm just going to gobble, gobble, gobble the food and devil take the hindmost. Regulation of cellular metabolism and the heme, all those things. And it doesn't stop there. The energy production, right? They generate our steroids. They're responsible for hormonal signaling, right? We know that hormones signal throughout the body, but who manages that? Who organizes that? Turns out the mitochondria. Immune signaling, they have an effect on our neurons, brain development. There's much more to this. I mean, it's many PhDs worth. This is just a very quick summary. There is the mitochondrial, if you think about the mitochondrial DNA, it's a bit like a bacterium. On the outside, you have this cardiolipin that holds the electron transport train that generates your energy. Damage the electron transport train at your peril, happening at scale because of the lives we lead, the food we eat, and that's ain't going to end well. So what does damage human metabolism? Because we're kind of onto that now. This is Robert Lustig, who is an absolute genius. He's got a fantastic YouTube channel. So if you're interested in this stuff, just go to YouTube and look at Robert Lustig. And he's identified what I think are the 8 key processes: glycation, oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction. We've talked about that. Insulin resistance. We'll come on to that. Membrane instability. I've talked about that briefly. Inflammation, epigenetic methylation. In other words, the way that our genome is held in 3 dimensions, which is eat yourself, right? So aspects to recycling of out of whack senescent cells. One is your immune system comes along and nukes them, destroys them and recycles them. The other version of it is self-destruction. If the self-destruction mechanism, the autophagy, doesn't work, then you want the apoptosis. But if your immune system isn't working very well, it doesn't end well. Think about COVID. I think about who died of COVID. Processes, and broadly, what's the root causes? And again, I'm giving a very top line, very fast view here. Glycation. A lot of sugar in your diet, you end up with these sugar molecules attached to proteins. And if you've got a typical Western diet, high in sugar, carbs, and processed food, you're glycating at a rate that your mitochondria can't deal with. Stress. So as I said earlier on, the mitochondria naturally generate reactive oxygen species, but they're only supposed to generate a certain amount. And if it goes way beyond the ability of cope with the amount of ROS that are being generated, you get damage to the mitochondria, damage to the cell, damage to the organism, inflammation. And if you look broadly, if you think, okay, what's the link between diabetes, diseases like dementia, disease and cancer? What have they got in common? Inflammation, damaged mitochondria, reactive oxygen species. Insulin resistance in a bit more detail, but too much sugar, you've got a problem. membranes. So that's partly the result of mitochondrial dysfunction, partly eating the wrong fats. So the ancestral diet, you're probably aware, omega-3s are the non-inflammatory fats, and the omega-6s are the pro-inflammatory fats. The ancestral diet would have had more or less a 1-to-1 ratio of the two. Modern diet is 20 to 1 in the wrong direction. Briefly about epigenetics and methylation, the B vitamins. And this is why epigenetic expression is more important for longevity than gene expression, right? So yes, you can't change your genes, but you can affect gene expression. And you can affect that in a bad way by smoking, right? Or a good way by the ways that I'll come to. And then damage to autophagy when that mechanism just stops working as it should. And you've got senescent cells hanging around. You know what the major cause of death is these days, right? Heart disease, cancer, respiratory, and so on. There's a huge increase in autoimmune diseases. I mean, pick your autoimmune disease of choice: thyroid, diabetes, asthma. After 2 million years of evolution, ladies and gentlemen, why would your body start to attack itself? Makes no sense, does it? A bit about energy. Don't worry too much about the complexity of the slide. Master hormone. And there's a cascade of hormones, and the body is full of these kind of mechanisms where you've got an on and an off, right? Like when you drive your car, you've got the accelerator and the brake. Put your foot flat on the accelerator, you end up in the nearest tree. Plant your foot on the brake, you don't go very far. And, you know, safe progress is made by modulating the two, full of mechanisms like that. And so this principle of homeostasis, the very tight control of the inside of the cell, is about these competing mechanisms where one might do A and the other one would do the reverse of that. And it's by the two things working in harmony. They're antagonistic, but they're working in harmony to keep you where you should be. And you think how exquisitely we control our body temperature, right? Our hydration, how it's all controlled exquisitely by really complex mechanisms. Fascinating, because it's a master hormone. And insulin has an effect on, there's an insulin receptor in literally every cell in the body. So every cell can react to insulin, which tells you how fundamentally important it is. But it doesn't have the same effect on every cell. So there are multiple different, I think 20 or 30 different insulin receptors. It depends which on the cell of interest, right? But I'm trying to give you the sense of how important and critical insulin is. I tend to think about it as the hormone that controls the blood glucose, right? And also the hormone that is a hunger hormone. So you've got ghrelin, the incretins will come on to those, GLPs, you've seen Ozempic and Wegovy. There's a huge range of hormones that work together to maintain your weight, maintain your energy storage, and keep you in energy balance. The entire bloodstream at any one time is designed to have one sugar lump in it, right? Just one sugar lump. If you've got 2 sugar lumps in your entire bloodstream, you've got type 2 diabetes, right? If you've got 3 sugar lumps in your entire 8 pints of blood, you're dead. This is the principle of homeostasis. And when your blood glucose goes up, the insulin comes in, removes the glucose for processing. You've basically got 2 storage mechanisms. You've got glycogen, and your glycogen stores, as your sugar stores, are in your muscle and in your liver. A total of about 500 grams. Glycogen stores are full. The rest of the sugar, if you're not going to burn it, gets converted to fat. And this is why it isn't fat that makes you fat, because fat has no effect on insulin. It's raised glucose that makes you fat. Raising your blood glucose with your McDonald's and chips and, you know, all that stuff. And you keep raising your insulin, more. You're stuffing everything into the fat cell, right? Because you don't want it in your bloodstream, so it goes into the fat cell. And eventually your fat cell starts to become insulin resistant because it's got no more space for fat. The process, right? If you had all the fat cells and one's full and the ones next to it are not full, you'd expect that one to become insulin resistant and fill up and fill up and fill up. But we've only got a certain number of fat cells. So once your fat cells become absolutely rammed, inflammation, damage, the fat starts to pour out, you've got inflammation, and so on and so forth. 2 diabetes, basically. So eventually you get to the point where you're keeping chucking in the sugar, you're keeping chucking out more insulin, more sugar, more insulin. And at a certain point, your body cannot make any more insulin. It's literally at maximum. That sugar overwhelms the insulin. The way I look at it is like a dam. So if you imagine the insulin is the dam and there's a lake of sugar on this side, more insulin, more sugar, more insulin. Everything looks fine on that side of the dam until the sugar starts to come over the top and then it collapses. And that's pre-diabetes followed by diabetes. And it comes on quite quickly. You've got fat literally everywhere. You've got fat in your heart muscles, in your other muscles, in your pancreas, and in your liver. And once you get a fatty liver, you're on your way to real problems, real metabolic problems. The story of type 2 diabetes in 5 minutes. Just the type 2 diabetes. You say, well, it's just type 2 diabetes, but the knock-on effects of the type 2 diabetes are huge. Type 2 diabetes is more likely to kill you than smoking. I'll say that again, right? That's how much damage type 2 diabetes does to your body. It's literally more likely to kill you than smoking. No one knows. It's an effect on cardiovascular disease, your lipids get deranged, you get blood pressure, it's a cancer risk, it's a dementia risk, polycystic ovarian syndrome, fatty liver, you name it, it goes on and on and on. I haven't got time to go into all the mechanisms today. When you eat too much sugar, too much carb, too much processed food, and the list is just endless. They know that. They know that they shouldn't be having, sugar in their tea and they shouldn't be having the jelly babies. And they think, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to eat starch, healthy whole grains, right? But these are starch molecules, and all starch molecules is glucose molecules stuck together with an oxygen. So when you eat your bread, your pasta, your rice, your chips, and you break that down, in the end, it's just sugar. Kind of think, oh, well, it's a long chain thing, and you get slightly less of a glucose spike. But when your body metabolizes or catabolizes the sugar, it doesn't care whether it was added sugar or whether it was always there, already there. It can't tell the difference. The mechanisms by which it deals with it are the same mechanism. We only have the one mechanism. So to illustrate that another way, cocoa pots in the morning. Oh yeah, my favorite cornflakes, 30-gram portion of cornflakes. Nearly 9 spoonfuls of sugar equivalent. Grams is like a thimbleful. I defy anyone in this room to eat 30 grams of cornflakes. Most people end up eating 90 grams. So you'll start your day with like 30 spoonfuls of sugar. Cornflakes and the oat porridge are a bit better, but they're still not good. I don't know, some whole grain barley bread at lunchtime, a few slices of that. So you've had 30 spoonfuls of sugar for breakfast. You never have another 15 spoonfuls of sugar for lunch. So you're up to 45 spoonfuls of sugar. And then in the evening, you have a nice salad with some boiled potatoes, another 10 or 20 spoonfuls of sugar. How are we up to now? We're up to about 70 or 80, right? And I don't know about you, but I love an Indian takeaway with basmati rice, right? So we're having sugar for breakfast, sugar for lunch, sugar for dinner, sugar, 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 sugar. One of the problems, and the other one is, as I spoke earlier on, is the amount of omega-6 fat. As I said, the correct ratio is a 1-to-1 ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. Eating broadly about 2 grams a day to eating 18 grams a day. Why? Because it's cheap. Very cheap to manufacture. Madness of the human being, right? On the plate is the margarine, the reduced fat margarine, and the natural butter. Look where the ants are. Right? The ants know what to eat. It's just the human beings that don't. Just talk a little bit about mental health and how this comes in. Depression, ADHD, bipolar, schizoaffective disorder. Massive growth, right? You probably know in your generation, huge increase in mental health issues. And antidepressants, this is from the Pharmaceutical Journal recently. Antidepressant prescribing increased by 35% in 6 years. The number of young children prescribed antidepressants, COVID's obviously made a bad thing worse, increased by 41%. And does what we eat affect our brain? Well, last time I checked, the brain was connected to the body. And their answer is a resounding yes. It's on to the ketogenic diet. Anyone here aware of the ketogenic diet? On keto? View, good thing, bad thing, good thing? I think so. So the ketogenic diet is quite fascinating, actually. It was knew that when children had epilepsy and there were no drugs, fasting the kids would stop the epileptic fits. A child long-term is obviously not a good plan, and it's not feasible. 1920s in Johns Hopkins University, they tried to introduce what was basically a fasting mimicking diet. What was it about fasting children with epilepsy that stopped the epilepsy? It was the ketones. And from that came the principle of the keto diet and nutritional ketosis. Quite a big thing until the drugs came along, right? If you come with me on the journey, think about inflammation, mitochondria, damage, all the different organs it might play out in. Definition, diabetes is metabolic dysfunction. If you've got diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, and Alzheimer's, you might have a mental illness. And it's a two-way street principle. Mental health orders are metabolic disorders, but we don't think of them like that. This is new science. Okay, this is all the bad news. Should we have some solutions now and cheer ourselves up a bit? Probably you've gathered by now, I'm quite keen on the keto diet, the fat. It's a very good fuel. It's a fuel that works even when your body's insulin resistant. Health, heart health, gut health, anti-inflammatory in its action. It's all good news, really. It's a much better fuel. And when you're basically, once your mitochondria change your mitochondria's ability to burn a different fuel. So essentially we're dual fuel machines, a bit like a Toyota Prius, right? We're designed to eat sugar and fat. But if there's sugars around, we'll always burn the sugar first because it's toxic, not because it's a preferred fuel. So if you keep chucking fuel into the system, you lose the ability to burn the fat, but you're storing it. Insulin's high, you're storing, but you can't burn it. And I get the tyranny of food. I used to, the fatter I got, the hungrier I got. The hungrier I got, the fatter I got. And I probably had, 500,000 stored calories that I couldn't access. Mitochondria burn sugar and glucose. They give off a lot more active oxygen species, right? And excess of that is cellular damage, inflammation, doesn't end well. And even in type 2 diabetics, where they lose the ability to control their sugar, they can still use ketones. So I get my type 2 diabetics, I swap their fuel over basically, get them to eat a fat-based diet, replace the carbs and sugars in their diet with fat and protein, and their diabetes goes away, or at least it goes into remission, to be more accurate. An alternative fuel to glucose, you get more ATP generation, so it's a more efficient way to generate energy than it is from glucose. Problems with hyperglycemia, very high blood sugar, and hyperinsulinemia, which we talked about with the diabetes. Fewer reactive oxygen species, enhanced mitochondrial biogenesis. In other words, generating a new, fresh, healthy mitochondria, which is foundationally important. It has anti-inflammatory signaling effects. The reason it works in epilepsy is that you've got, I said you've got the accelerator and the brake, right? Modulating in the brain, so GABA and glutamate, basically. You rebalance the brain. There's less stimulation going on, less likelihood of an epileptic fit because you're not overstimulating all the time, and the cells are healthier. And that's kind of more or less the mechanism in epilepsy. But generally a good thing, particularly if you're diabetic and particularly if you've got mental health problems. So it's been quite remarkable in the last 5 years. The keto diet isn't just being used to treat epilepsy and diabetes, it's being used to treat all these ever increasing number of mental health problems, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, all incredibly, and the drugs of really poor quality in those mental health disease states. So it's a revolution. But of course, the pharmaceutical industry doesn't want you to know that because you'd lose fewer drugs, and McDonald's sure as hell don't want you to know that. So can we Wegovy our way out of the diabetes crisis, right? Eating seems to think we can. It's going to give it, 1.5 million people the Wegovy? We're not going too much into the weeds of this. Wegovy is a GLP-1 agonist. The GLP-1s make you more insulin sensitive, and they slow down gastric emptying. So you feel fuller for longer and you eat less. So you eat less of your shit diet, right? Well, is eating less of a shit diet a good thing? Might be. But if you go back to what I was saying earlier on about micronutrient content, really depriving your body of really good nutrition. So now you're eating less, so you're less fat. But think about the fundamentals of nutrition and cellular biology, reduces that. That's one problem. Again, GLP is part of a whole complex of different hormones. There's 4 different incretin hormones, which kind of work together in a balanced way, homeostasis, right? You get one of these and hammer it. Something tells me it's not going to end well. Wegovy face. Seen that? Look at Elon Musk. He's a big Wegovy fan. His face is drawn and it's lost all its roundness because he's catabolized his muscle. And the latest thing crazy in America is Wegovy butt. So if you lose weight, so the principle of weight loss, healthy weight loss, is to minimize the loss of lean protein, right? You do not want to lose muscle. You do not want to lose bone. It's the fat. With these GLP-1s, these Ozempics, the Wegovys, the tirzepatides, the Mounjaros, half the weight loss is bone and muscle. Think what that means when you get old. You're literally making people frail, skinny fat. They might look better in their bikini, but they're sure as hell not healthier. So can we Wegovy our way out of the diabetes crisis? I would say, statinize our way out of the diabetes crisis. Okay. So there's a fantastic website called thennt.com, the numbers needed to treat. And the principle in medicine is harms and benefits. How many people need to take a drug for how long to get a benefit? How many people need to take when they take the same drug for the same period, get a harm? And do the benefits outweigh the harms? That's what medicine is designed to do. So there are two use cases for statins. One is people who are theoretically at elevated cardiovascular risk. They haven't had a stroke or a heart attack. This is significant mortality benefit. In other words, what else? I mean, to me, if it doesn't reduce your risk of dying, kind of what's the point? 117 people treated for 5 years had avoided a non-fatal heart attack. Is that impressive? You know? In other words, 216 people took the drug for 5 years, got no benefit. 300 plus all did a non-fatal stroke. Now, if you were the one person who avoided the non-fatal stroke, you might feel good about it. But if you were the 312 people that didn't benefit, you might think, I'm not sure that's a good, outcome for me. Okay, so that's the benefits. Now let's look at the harms. 1 in 21 experienced pain from muscle damage against the numbers needed to treat. And 1 in 204 got diabetes. Not a good risk-benefit relationship. And yet it's been handed out. Right? Percentage terms, you can express this as numbers or percentage. So 0.5% of people avoided a non-fatal heart attack, 0.3% avoided a non-fatal stroke, nearly 5% experienced muscle pain, and 0.5% got diabetes. That's in people who haven't had a primary event. Kind of better news, if you've had a stroke or a heart attack, there is a net benefit from a statin. Statin for 5 years, how much on average do you think it extends your life? Give me a guess. Okay. Anyone going to go more than 3 months? That's right. Years? I think most people would think 5-10 years, right? Based on the published trial data, the net life extension of taking a statin is for 5 years is 5 days of extra life. That's your net benefit. Oh, 5 days of extra life is 5 days of extra life. I'm up for that. Okay. So benefit. A few were saved from death. But when we say we saved their life, you mean they never died? It's ridiculous, right? When we talk about cancer, we talk about in remission. But when you say it's life-saving, so they live forever then? No, they just died a bit later. I mean, to me, these are not great odds. For me, in primary prevention, I think the case isn't there at all. For secondary prevention, it's equivocal. Right. So AI to the rescue, right? So this is the way I do blood pressure with my clients. So you wear a cuff here and you wear a little bracelet there, and it works by plethysmography, like the Oura Ring and like the watch. It calibrates, you take the cuff away, so the white coat hypertension and unpleasantness goes away, and then it takes blood pressure only 5 or 10 minutes, 24/7. Now, blood pressure is very labile, so the best in case use for diagnosing blood pressure is something called an ABPM, ambulatory blood pressure monitor, which is what we do in the pharmacy. We lend them a blood pressure monitor for 24 hours. And let's suppose it's a bit raised, so they go to the doctor, they start on some amlodipine. You never repeat it. So you really don't know what happened, right? The principal time when blood pressure normally goes up is the early hours of that. So as we arise from from sleep, that part morning arousal and the cortisol that's secreted raises blood pressure. And that's why people have their strokes and heart attacks in the early hours. Your doctor's not like to come around at 6 o'clock and take your blood pressure, right? So you take it at 2 p.m. And so the result is we've got massive overdiagnosis and massive underdiagnosis and pretty poor outcome data. This is one of my clients, and we got him off all his meds. Over the course of the month, there were 836 blood pressure readings, right? We really, really, really know that. And I've got clients where we've tracked them for a year, right? Thousands of readings, right? Just think what you can do with that. Pretty awful today. I had a terrible night's sleep. I've got to probably tell from my breath, from my voice. It's in my Oura ring. It gives you incredible sleep data. Fantastic data. There's, you know, this is just a fraction of the data it gives, but it's a great illustration of, I had a horrible night. I mean, generally I'm quite healthy. It says that my cardiovascular age is more or less aligned with my age. Most people are older than they should be. I'm a bit younger, so, you know, I'll take that. But I only had 4.5 hours to sleep last night. I was coughing and splutting and miserable and all of that. The Oura ring is you can put in any two variables that you want and look at the correlation coefficient between them. So I can see if I eat late or I don't eat late, if I eat carbs, if I don't eat carbs, if I do the sword and the cold plunge, or I don't eat that, if I exercise or I don't exercise. I can see that reflected in my quality of sleep. That has been a revolution in terms of my quality of life, how much I enjoy life, how positive I feel, how motivated I feel, joie de vivre, whatever you want to call it. And I'm probably because of my age, good sleep has been a revolution. So this is a device I really like. Biobank, UK Biobank. It's, I think, 500,000 people. It's the world's largest biobank. And they just chuck all the data they can into a big computer and it kind of comes out with, this is what we think. You have to be a bit careful because it's not out, you have to be careful. Are what we see cause and effect, right? Correlates with B, does A cause B? Or maybe B causes A. So you have to be a bit careful with this. But I think the potential for things like this, biobank and all this data, huge. Biobank of samples for 500,000 people stored for years. What will it show over time? Could be very interesting. Now, don't rely solely on genetics. As I've said, epigenetics trumps all. Don't forget about your mitochondria if you want to live long. Don't think you can outrun or out-supplement a bad diet. Don't neglect recovery, and I certainly need to think about that tomorrow. Don't assume that one size fits all. People's individual responses to absolutely everything is huge. And this is the one problem about with clinical trials. Particularly true with food, right? So I give all my clients a continual blood glucose monitor. Feed people identical meals and get completely different responses. So you might know about the glycemic index, that how much it raises your blood glucose across 1,000 people. But I'm only interested, when that is me, I'm interested in n equals 1. So I think we over-rely on mass data, and what we need to do is apply that to the patient in front of us. And also don't be lonely. Being lonely is a death sentence. Okay, these are the things that you should do. Positive, prioritize sleep, manage stress. I've talked about the nutrient-rich, species-appropriate diet. Do exercise, strength plus cardio, really important. Hormesis, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So that might be cold plunge in a sauna. It might be periods of not eating for more than 24 hours. And it might be high intensity exercise, and it might be all of those. All of which tend to give your body, you get apoptosis, autophagy, and the same things, mitophagy, generate new and better and fresher mitochondria. Get data. I've got plenty of data here. Stay engaged mentally and physically. Right, so I just talked to you briefly about the program that we run. So we run a program with people with metabolic syndrome. What you would probably call type 2 diabetes. And here's the frightening statistic. Only 8% of American adults are metabolically healthy. Or to put it another way, almost every American adult either has type 2 diabetes or they will have. That's how bad things are. And when you look at the food, ours is bad enough, but oh my God. So we do a sort of lifestyle questionnaire, sleep stress, all the kind of things I was talking to you about. We get their doctors to do blood pressure, lipids, what medication they're on, and so on. A couple of weeks, we just gather data and see how, for them, their life interacts with their blood glucose spikes, right? So you can see here, this guy is up and down quite a lot. This is the mean, and this is 1 and 2 standard deviations from the mean across 2 weeks. This is really quite poorly controlled blood glucose. Estimated A1C is 6.8%, so that's nicely into the diabetic range, aka 51 millimolar. It depends whether you want to do it in Fahrenheit or centigrade. So that is someone on their way to an early death. Within 4 weeks, for most of our clients, that'll be problem solved. Comes down, weight comes down, sleep improves, mood improves, hunger improves, blood pressure goes down. My client, so he wrote a little thing for us, a miraculous metamorphosis, he wrote. 12 months ago, chatting to Graham about my physical demise, metabolic syndrome, obese, clothes not fitting, 40-inch waist, everything poorly controlled, worried about stroke, sleep apnea, using a CPAP, gout. He was very inflamed and just life wasn't great. Graham told me about the blood glucose sugar sensor in the 8-week program, started the course, stopped putting sugar in my tea or coffee, stopped drinking cartons of orange juice. Eat your fruit, don't drink it, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, 3 months on, I dropped my waist size to 36. My sleep apnea is gone. I feel 30 years younger. My HbA1c is normal. My gout has gone. My psoriasis improved and my concentration is better. What meant the most to me, though, was when his wife came to me and said, "Thank you for giving me my husband back." The Greeks knew this, that our food should be our medicine and our medicine should be food. And now you know it too.